What's up everyone, I'm Twisted. Before watching this video, keep in mind that this contains spoilers for the upcoming Ambessa novel. As you might have heard, some reviews of the novel have already been shared online, and people have been talking about a potential retcon for Rell, and so I wanted to give my 2 cents on this situation, mostly because there's nothing else going on right now in terms of lore. First, for those who don't know, Ambessa Chosen of the Wolf is a novel that tells the story of Ambessa before the events of Arcane. The main plot of the book revolves around Ambessa and her cousin fighting over who should lead the Medarda clan after the death of their grandfather. Throughout the book, we also learn more about Mel and how she ended up in Piltover, as well as Ambessa's ties to the Black Rose. However, what everyone is focusing on right now is the inclusion of Rell. And if you are familiar with her story, knowing that she appears in a book that takes place before Arcane might already be sounding some alarms in your head. For those who don't know her story, here's a quick TLDR on who Rell is. Rell was released in League of Legends in December of 2020. Her release came with a biography for her, as well as a color story, which was the norm back then. However, Rell was actually teased before in Samira's story, which came out in September of that same year. Rell was born the heir of a Noxian noble house, and she was still very young when her magic manifested. Magic that allowed her to manipulate metal. Her parents tried to exploit their child. They tried to assign her as an apprentice to various powerful mages, but that didn't work out. Then LeBlanc convinced them to enroll her in a special academy. She was only 8 when she was forced to fight another student, and upon defeating them, their magic was turned into a sigil, which was grafted onto Rell, augmenting her powers. This was just the first of many, however, and Rell became extremely powerful, though she only found out what was happening when she turned 16, when she finally had enough and uncovered the truth. She discovered that her mother was behind it all, being the headmistress of the academy. Enraged, Rell destroyed the academy and fled. Now Rell stands against Noxus and the Black Rose, trying to help the weak as much as she can, including the Null, which were the kids whose magic was drained into the sigils. I won't dive into her color story, but do check it out if you want to learn more about how she views Noxus. Now, going back to Ambessa's novel, what's Rell's story there? Well, from what we know so far, Rell was forced by her parents to enter the pits of the arenas to earn money. This is where she meets Ambessa, who takes her on as an apprentice, though she is later taken in by the Black Rose. So far, this doesn't seem that big of a retcon, but here's the weird part. Apparently, Rell is the same age as Mel in the novel, this being 15, and as I said in her lore, Rell was taken by the Black Rose when she was 8 or even earlier. I do think that most of her story can remain somewhat the same, with her time in the academy happening after the novel, and the 8 or so years of abuse there being reduced to just 1 if she still frees herself at 16, which could also be changed to happen later, but I admit that it feels very strange to make such a big change to her timeline, especially considering her story isn't even that old. If she's the same age as Mel, then we can make some quick maths here. Mel was exiled to Piltover for at least a decade before Ambessa arrives in season 1. She says it herself in the show, and it's also mentioned in her bio. If she's 15 in the novel, then in season 1 post-time skip, when Ambessa arrives, she has to be at least 25. Her concept art states that she's 26, though sources like this should always be taken with a grain of salt. I've seen people assume that she's 26 before the time skip, but the only source is this image. If that's true, then about 6 or 7 years later, when Ambessa arrives, she should be around 33. If so, this means she arrived in Piltover when she was around 23, meaning in less than 3 years she became a council member. Not saying it's impossible, I'm just being skeptical while we don't have a better source for her age. We don't know how much time passed between Ambessa arriving in Piltover and Mel arriving in Noxus, but I think it's safe to assume everything happened in less than 2 years. Again, making Mel at least around 26, or if we assume that was her age pre-time skip, at least 33 in her last appearance. Though this last appearance probably doesn't take place in the most quote-unquote present point in the timeline, so Mel might actually be in her late 30s or even 40 according to the folks from the wiki. The whole timeline is very ambiguous right now because of the Arcane retcon, and this Rell situation surely isn't helping. We can conclude that when Mel arrives in Noxus, Rell is likely in her 30s or at least 20s, meaning Rell might actually be older than Samira, which is really funny. Still, her current age doesn't really matter, what matters is that she's not 16 anymore. Characters aging isn't necessarily a bad thing. It has happened before, for example with Talia. When she was released in League in 2016, she was stated to be 16, though after her most recent story, she's now stated to be 23. The difference between Talia and Rell is that Talia's story wasn't retconned. It just moved forward. She was still 16 when she met Yasuo, and she was 23 when she met Kai'Sa. And she at least got some lore between these 2 points in her life, while Rell was mostly forgotten after her initial lore and is now being retconned. With this being said, I think this age change isn't necessarily necessarily that bad. What matters to me is how much of her character actually changes. Being exploited by her rich, noble Black Rose agent mother from an early age is core to Rell's character, in my opinion. Her anger toward her parents and toward the government are intertwined with one another. Be it the Triferix or the Black Rose, they are all bad to her. But so far we don't know if this remains true or not. We just know that her time in the academy likely didn't start until she was at least 15. I know there are a lot of reasons to hate Riot right now, from the mess that the lore has been in for the past years, the layoffs, and of course their shady monetization. However, I'll be saving my judgment of this Rell situation until I read the novel myself. On the bright side, I do think Rell fits thematically quite well in Ambessa's story. Rell almost being the daughter Ambessa wished she had, though Rell and Mel aren't so different. Both were mages, and this was the reason for both of them to be exploited. Both were seen as weapons. And even what they did amidst this conflict is similar. They lashed out, becoming a weapon, but one that turned against those who wanted to use them. With this being said, they are still very different characters. Mel embraced the fox, becoming a diplomat, being part of the system from a privileged position where she didn't have to fight against it and could still seek her mother's validation until their final battle, while Rell kept being exploited until she rebelled against the system itself, rebelled against her mother. These are two characters that are now opposed to Noxus and its ideologies, but Mel still benefits from a privileged position while Rell is now basically seen as a terrorist by the Empire. Mel chose to fight, Rell was forced to, not to mention their connections to the Rose, with Rell's mother being a member of the Cabal and Ambessa, well, we still gotta wait to know the full picture, but we do know that she has some history with them, and this makes me believe that Rell will still be used by the Rose in some way. With this being said, my final verdict for this situation is still this. Let's wait. Let's wait until the novel comes out. Let's wait until we see how much Rell has changed. I think Rell being exploited by her parents from even before she was 8 made sense for her character. However, her new lore can still keep this exploitation at an early age, but present it in a different way. Maybe her being assigned to different mages happened for a longer period. Maybe Rell fighting in the arenas was just her parents' last of many efforts to turn her into a weapon before they assigned her to the academy. I think the core of who Rell is can remain the same despite the changes. With this being said, I understand that being a teenager is part of her character's fantasy, but I think as long as we get lore of her when she was in her teens, and then lore that moves her story forward as she ages, it will be fine. The problem really comes with her actually getting new lore, but to be fair, I don't think Riot would include her in a novel tied to Arcane if they didn't have plans for her in the future. So again, my conclusion is that we should wait for this lore to arrive before we judge it. Though I think this Rell issue is part of a much bigger conversation about League's lore, and especially about the champions. How much can you change a character before they become a brand new one? How much is changing a character worth them becoming more relevant? Rell was abandoned lore-wise, like most champions. If these changes came at the cost of her finally being relevant, were they worth it? How much can they change about her before the relevancy she gets doesn't become worth it anymore? And does Riot really need to change a character so much in order for them to be relevant? I think this is a very interesting topic, but maybe for another time. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing, it's free and you can always change your mind later. I'm Twisted and I'll see you guys in the next one.